Hello and welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. I'm also doing this in sign language, but it's a podcast, so you probably can't tell that. It's a bit annoying. Didn't really think about that, did I, Chris? Oh well. Today's an interesting episode. It's one that's been on the list to do for a very, very long time. And it's one that I'm really hoping is going to make people think. I'm really hoping it will actually empower people as well. How often do I say that?
Oh, wow.
Ease of access. Now, I am not very politically correct, partly because I don't really have any interest in being politically correct, mainly because I struggle to keep up to date with what terms and things you're supposed to use for different types of people and stuff. Ease of access is normally a menu or feature or something like that in things like Microsoft Windows or iPhone, that sort of thing, technology. It normally loads up options and configurations that you can make for your computer or your device to make it easier for people that would be classed as disabled, right? Now, there are some people that say that you're not allowed to use the term disabled, but no one's ever given me another word to use, so I don't know whether that is acceptable nowadays or isn't acceptable. If it isn't acceptable, I apologize, but I just don't know what word you're supposed to use. So I'm going to use the term disabled, and I don't want people thinking that I'm doing it to be rude. It's just the only term I was brought up with. Okay. So disabilities, essentially, from my perspective, there are things that the majority of people can do. Okay, whether it's physical or mental, or some might even say potentially emotional, I don't know. Vast majority, so common things that are just accepted that everybody should be able to do or usually can do. Things like use their legs and walk is a classic kind of example. Now, there are some people that can't do that. There are some people that might have had a leg amputated, for example. They would be considered disabled. They might have a metal leg, like someone I know. There are other people that might have legs, but they might not have uses of them. They might have to use a wheelchair, for example. There are other people with things such as dyslexia and that. God knows much. I don't know much about that. I just know that if you've got dyslexia, you were allowed to have the exam questions read to you out loud. What a dyslexia is, I don't know. People accuse me of having it. Where I got it from, I couldn't tell you, but there we go. There's all sorts of things. Some things are obvious to the naked eye, other things not so much. One thing I've always been jealous of, Tourette's, right? Could you imagine me with Tourette's? That would be something to behold, wouldn't it? Now, today we're talking about disability and ease of access in terms of making magical practice easier in terms of a group setting for other people that may not be as able-bodied or have the same mental capacities as you do. But also, possibly even more importantly than that, because this is where we can steal the secret knowledge and such, Chris. More importantly, perhaps understanding how other people that are not like us, so disabled people potentially, how they go about doing magic, and whether there's something that we can learn from that. So how does someone make sigil magic if they're blind? Do they even do sigil magic if they're blind? What type of blindness are we talking about? Are we talking legally blind where they can tell the difference still potentially between night and day? They just can't make out details and stuff? Or are we talking blind as in they lost their sight when they were 16, 17? Or blind as in they've never ever been able to see in this entire incarnation? All these things, so many different people. That's just one thing, blindness, so many different types of blindness. Color blindness is considered a type of blindness. Where do you want to start, Chris? Big topic.
Huge topic. The main reason I wanted to make sure it was on the list back then was because we constantly had questions, I think, from kind of moots that have arranged. I think that's how this one came along, where they talk about, people taking part in group rituals and things, and being able to make sure that they could be as inclusive as possible, because obviously that's the tag word, hashtag inclusivity is kind of the word that we kind of use. How do we make sure that everybody can have equal access to everything? Is one of those kind of modern concepts that we have to deal with. And how does that apply magically? So, lots of people focus on the whole, now we have Zoom calls. Most of us can, we do most of our calls internationally. We don't fly out. We don't have that big a budget. So we focus mostly on having access to people using modern technology. What parts of that does that afford access to? Some people and not others. Obviously, Liam the robot gave the best possible robot answer he could give, and went down to kind of Windows ease of access. What exactly is that? So for me, it's where the kind of big topics we need to kind of cover today is kind of how groups get together. So how practicing together, what changes can be made in order to make that easier, so that somebody that wants to be in a coven, who has access issues, could still go and be part of a coven in this day and age. So I think that's one thing we definitely need to try and cover today, Liam. I think the other part is, which is going to be the harder one, and those listening that are made masters of the wokeness will need to actually take a chill pill today and actually listen to what we're actually saying.
They don't do chill pills, Chris.
So, well, they're going to have to, because otherwise they're going to spend most of this one very upset otherwise, because I don't want to waste too much time talking about political correctness and wokeness, and I want to actually get to what we can do.
Okay.
So I'm not going to be the woke police for you today, Liam, and I'm going to allow you to pretty much within reason say what you need to say. I think a big part of that is kind of getting to grips with, we're not making any kind of argument about and ability, that kind of organization of thought. What I need to kind of focus on is, okay, if somebody has a loss of sight, or at some point in their life, there is this concept of balancing out. There is this concept of other senses extending themselves in order to kind of try and right that balance. So, having to be more reliant on those other senses in order to get about. So for that blind person, that will mean that their sense of hearing might be more acute after that. They're more tactile. So having to learn things like Braille really relies on that tactileness, kind of getting as over-sensory as possible, to be able to tell by touch. Those teeny tiny bumps is a skill in itself, but in order for that to operate, there is an adjustment that the body is making to heighten those other senses. So what I want to do is talk about that concept. So if somebody has, a mental challenge, someone that suffers with, I'm going to blur the lines for disability here and kind of include and put on the table things like, schizophrenia, mental health, all those kind of things can be thrown into this mix to talk about. Because I'm going to use the term disability as broad as I possibly can, and not get all woke about what disability is or isn't. What I want to talk about is any kind of limitation, and how can us as magical practitioners get around that limitation, whatever that is, in order to succeed more in practice. Now, I will go as basic as saying, how on earth does somebody as a blind person has to have and has to develop, because they've got no choice, has to develop a really good mind's eye of knowing where things are in relation to each other. Now, I hear lots of practitioners struggling with, basic bitches struggling with the concept of, how do I do a meditation? Oh, I'm not very good. Every time I close my eyes, I fall asleep. I'm really struggling with that mind's eye aspect, which isn't something that comes naturally to everybody. Some people are much easier at that, of visualization, and other people just can't do it. Or at least I'm going to use the word can't, because that's the word they use. I think it's actually won't. But that's because I feel like, maybe I'm being too woke here. I think actually, when it comes to the astral body, everything's up for grabs as far as I'm concerned. So there is that kind of as above, so below that we may have to cover at the other side, where we can be a bit less sensitive about it. Might have to wait until they pass the watershed. Because I think that's probably going to get too easily offended by that. But let's start with as basic as that. So in order for you to have a full awareness of your surroundings and to be able to navigate that space blind, and you could try this at home, you could literally put a blindfold on of any kind, t-shirt, whatever, wrap it around your head, scarf, as we're getting into those winter months now, and try and navigate that space. Now, you know what that space looks like because you look at it every day, because you are not blind. Can you navigate that the second you take your sight away? How easy actually is that for you? Bearing in mind, you actually know what that space looks like. Now, if you've never had sight, then how are you supposed to navigate that space having no idea what that space looked like to begin with? Just to kind of give you, on the most basic level, a surface level understanding of what loss of one of those abilities are. Now, the reason I kind of want to have this discussion kind of now is kind of twofold. One is because you all need to be aware, with the conversations we've been having recently, is that there may be some changes afoot. And that means that you can't rely on the things that you are good at. You need to balance that board a little bit more so that you are able to adapt if suddenly that thing you're really good at, you are no longer good at.
Like Star Wars, when Yoda or whoever it is made Luke Skywalker put blindfold on to do his Jedi training and that. Or like they do in those martial arts movies where, you fight with the weapons and the swords and that, but then they blindfold you and you get beaten up. And then you learn, like Mr. Miyagi, you learn to feel the motion of stuff and that. And then you can do all sorts of crazy ass ninjutsu shit with a blindfold on, right? Yeah. Yes, Chris. People want to be able to do crazy ass magical ninjutsu shit just closing their eyes. Are you telling them they can?
I'm telling them that they can, and actually, to get to the levels of practice that you're going to need to survive this next wave, if you want to keep those little magics that you're used to having, and potentially gain more, then you're going to have to keep that in mind of, if I suddenly couldn't do it this way, how would I do it? And I think from a disability point of view, I think that's where I want you to be focusing it, is if I suddenly lost this sense tomorrow, could I still practice? And the example I'm going to give on a magical point of view is I'm going to give astral sight as the obvious one of kind of going, okay, if suddenly I took away your astral sight because, let's just say all things are on the table during war, I'm going to take your astral sight away.
Again.
So what are you going to have to do in order to navigate around the fact that you can't use your sight?
Well, it's easy. I'm going to cry for a bit, and then I'm going to go to Liam.
Is that what most of them will say?
Well,
Go to Liam.
I just go by actions because actions speak louder than words. So I don't know at this point. I know there'll be some crying involved, Chris.
Yeah, definitely.
They'll be getting completely freaked out, and people won't necessarily know what the next step is, but there'll be a lot of freaked out. So I think it's a bit like James Bond. In James Bond, there was the guy, and they basically like got their fingers and pushed it into his eye sockets, and he was blind. And then he just kind of went into shock. I mean, he stopped fighting because he kind of like on a psychological level had a break and thought, well, if I can't see, I can't fight. I can't do anything. What am I? Am I worthless? What is the point? The other side is won. The enemy is won. I no longer can see. It's just a matter of time before they snuff out my life. Or like Kill Bill, my favorite film in all of the world. In the second volume, where Beatrix Kiddo plucks out Hannah's second eye, and she's a crying and going about saying, you bitch, I'm going to kill you. She's stumbling about. Pai Mei, because she killed her, clearly she killed Pai Mei before he taught her how to fight blind, didn't it? Shouldn't have poisoned his fish heads. That's the moral of that story.
It's the moral of that story, definitely.
Ego for you. Ego.
So what I want to kind of focus on is that it's kind of, you need to be as multifunctional as possible. So you should, as part of your practice, be pushing in the places that you are not good at if you are hoping to be successful.
Yes.
Now, obviously, I'm using the term, loosely on the fact that with disability, obviously, there are adaptations that can be made to the home, to life. You talked about a metal foot. There are ways to adapt and equipment that can be used in order to make your terrain easier to work with. As above, so below. There is a magical equivalent to that, which is you having to power up in the spaces that you are not good at. You need to balance out that equation. You need to balance out those unfortunate disabilities we all have, magically speaking. Because there is that, which is why when you're studying with me and Liam, we'll kind of always start with that kind of scratch testing with, particularly with the planets, because they're neutral in their kind of execution, which means that kind of getting to know, where are my weak points? If I'm missing a leg, and I'm using this figurative here, missing a leg or an arm, or my hearing is gone, these are magical stand-ins is what I'm talking about. So if my psychic ability isn't very good, then I need to be working on that. If my spell casting is shit, I need to be able to work on that. Something as complex as kind of spell casting, there will be parts of that you might be good at, other parts not so good. So with that, it'd be a case of, actually, I'm really good at fucking people up, but I'm not very good at healing them. Now, if you're good at fucking people up, you should be good at healing them. Those are two sides of the same coin, but that doesn't seem to correlate with some of the bitches that we have met over the years, where it should be, correlation tracks that it should be good at both of those things. So is it the actual mental conviction part, the kind of mind games part, that you're not good at there? I said about visualization earlier. Are you not very good at recall? Are you not very good at memory? Is there a way for you to fix that? Is there a way for you to balance that out? All of these considerations need to be thought about for you. Where are you at now? Where should you be as a balanced practitioner? I know we covered some of this in the kind of Venus versus Mercury one, where we were talking about kind of how people naturally lean to one side or the other, and trying to kind of get yourself back to this middle ground of being able to use them equally. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep pushing forward with the things that you are good at. What I'm trying to say is that if you suddenly weren't good at the thing you like doing best, how the fuck would you sort your life out afterwards?
What will you do, or how will you adapt in order to survive? Because survival of the fittest within magic. Now, we haven't got time to go through every single disability, whether it be physical or mental or what. So if people are adapting or trying to adapt magical practice to their own physical and mental capacities, then that's what the mentoring's for. We've both taken on, individually and jointly, different people with various different backgrounds, various different magical abilities, various different physical abilities and mental capacities, and all of it. We've gone through so many different types of people. At this point, we can say, yes, we'll probably be able to do something in order to adapt magical practice for you. The thing you need to get out of your mind is you need to get this, I think, political side of things out of your mind. So the political sides of this subject, I think, are becoming a problem and stunting the growth of magical practice. Because what I hear about when I hear people talking about disability and witchcraft and magic and paganism and stuff is, we're going and doing a ritual at ♯/♯ but maybe we should change it because it's not wheelchair accessible, which normally responds with people say, well, if it's not wheelchair accessible, it's not wheelchair accessible. We've always done it there. When they say always, they haven't been doing it for thousands of years. They've been doing it for like 15 years at the most, you know. We'll continue to do it there. And then if people that are disabled, they want to set their own one up somewhere, they can go and do it, right? Now, I don't blame the people that want to go and do their ritual in the little stone circle that's not wheelchair accessible. If they want to go and do that, they can go and fucking do that. If people want to set up another ritual that's similar but is wheelchair accessible, they can go and fucking do that. The problem is when people come to me and they say, Liam, do you condone this? Do you think you can arrange or help me get to ♯/♯? I really want to go. I'll say, no, I fucking ain't. This is what people don't understand. The reason why I don't care about whether rituals, public rituals that the pagans and such do, or moots and such, are wheelchair accessible, and I'm using that term because that's the one that's come up the most personally, is because if the person in the wheelchair gets to that ritual, they ain't gonna fucking learn anything. The reason they're not going to learn anything is because most of them are absolute shit. Okay? LARPing and such. Whenever you have a proper magical practitioner and you've got a ritual or something like that, and there's someone, whether it would be children, whether it would be adults, it doesn't matter who it is, that has a disability, physical, mental, whatever it is, if you're legitimately a proper magical practitioner, you should be able to alter whatever fucking ritual you're doing to accommodate that person, because you can use your magical knowledge to adapt the thing that you're doing. The big problem that I'm seeing is that these people that get the little fucking book, Wiccan Book of Shadows, Buckland's big blue book of bullshit, they've all got to stand in a circle. They've all got to do this. They've all got to do that. And they don't know how to adapt things, partly because they don't really know how the thing that they're doing works in the first place. In fact, most of the time it doesn't fucking work. They go for a spooky experience hoping that it will work, which is no different than these paranormal investigators. Legitimate magical practitioners can and will be able to adapt things to suit people with disabilities. Whether they choose to or not is really up to them. Now, there's a big thing, I think, in traditional witchcraft where there are traditions and stuff that get done, get passed on and such. But these traditions do vary and they do change and such. The thing with coven work in particular is that the coven, generally speaking, will take in members like the fucking sword of Gryffindor. It takes in only that which makes it stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if someone has a disability, we'll stick with the wheelchair thing. Does that mean that that coven is going to say, well, sorry, you've got a disability, you're not going to be able to join? Potentially, potentially not. I've seen groups physically put people that have no use of their legs on stretchers and carry them into the forest because that member of the coven is so integral and important in the brotherhood, the sisterhood, the family, whatever you want to talk about, so integrally important that they must be there. They must be a part of that coven, a part of that group. Okay. Survival. If you've got some super duper awesome psychic and you've got a coven that isn't particularly psychic, well endowed psychically, let's say, they're gonna fucking adapt their practices pretty fucking quick to get a psychic of that caliber in that fucking coven. So really, where it goes down is the problems arise with people wanting to learn magic, I think, and not being able to because they're unable to find magical practitioners that are willing to teach them. Some of them may be willing to teach them, but won't do a very good job because they cannot understand how to teach a deaf, blind person.
Yeah.
How to teach a deaf, blind person. We'll go over most of the heads of most Wiccans. They can't even see the fucking circle they're supposed to be wheeled into. Can't hear it either. Can't hear the chanting. You ask the deaf-blind person and say, I'll call the West, I'll call water, you call this, you call that. They've done it all and they're still there because they can't hear everyone are doing the calling. Didn't even hear you give them the instructions and tell them that you were supposed to be doing anything. Don't even fucking know that you're in the room. They don't know, right? All of this stuff. It is very difficult trying to find a practitioner that's fucking any good in this day and age. I will admit that. It is about finding someone that can teach you or developing your practices. That is the only two things that you're realistically going to be able to do. You find someone or something to teach you, or you develop things yourself. If you develop things yourself, you will have developed to either utilize or combat, depending on which way you're looking at it and what disability you're struggling with. You're overcoming that or using it to your advantage, right? Which basically means if you've done that, then there's probably going to be other people in the world that are going to want that magical knowledge, which is where blind covens come in, which most people would refer to blind covens as covens with practitioners with no psychic ability. I'm actually meaning physically blind covens, similarities. Now, I've done enough workshops and stuff and taught enough people to know that if you get a bunch of people that are stereotypically fit and healthy with no outward signs of disability or inward signs of disability or anything like that, and you get them all to do psychic readings or tell them all how to do a psychic reading, half of them won't be able to fucking do it because they already do it differently. You get someone to, can you feel the energy here? Can you see the energy? Close your eyes and see the energy. See what manifestation this rosemary plant shows you. Some people are visual, some people will get it. Other people can't get fuck all, but they'll get the sensation, tingly sensation, they'll get the scent, they'll get something.